Hello, my loves. Today we're going to look at some more Reddit stories, and if you've enjoyed a Reddit story, why don't you consider hitting the subscribe button? Maybe that's the notification bell too, and let's start with today's story. Pumpkin Boots Original Horror Story. Branches swayed as a light chill engulfed. No one was visible to the eye, but you could hear people faintly. It was Halloween night, and most were out having fun, except for 24-year-old Sarah Linnick. She sat within the confines of the bus stop shelter, which resided on a short rural road. She had just finished her 8-hour shift at the local petrol station, a mile's walk from the bus stop. Sarah's brunette hair flickered gently, her left foot tapped repeatedly. The bus was 5 minutes late. She glanced down at her phone, 9:05 p.m. She sighed, rolling her big brown eyes. This was the third time this had happened within the week. All she had to keep her company was the orange leaves that scattered the ground, and the pub that resided half a mile away. The whistling air brought her just a smidge of comfort. Sarah turned her head left to see a car driving in her direction. It beeped its horn and gradually slowed down. The driver's window lowered. "Hey, fancy a lift, love," the girl shouted as she and her friend in the passenger seat giggled. The driver was dressed as a nurse, and her friend a slutty clown. It was pretty clear both were under the influence of something. Alcohol? Drugs? Both? It was hard to tell. "Oh, never mind then," the driver laughed as she slammed her foot on the accelerator. Not even so much as giving Sarah a chance to respond. The fumes from the car cornered her in the bus shelter. "Idiots," Sarah said under her breath. A part of her envied girls like that. She so wished she could be as carefree as them, but it just wasn't in her nature. She hated the fact that she was so sensitive, so insecure. Her negative opinion of herself had been holding her back for most of her life. Sarah was completely unaware of her attractive qualities, and what she was capable of bringing to the table. It had been a rough couple of months, breaking up with her boyfriend of 5 years, along with financial struggles and toxic family drama. Sarah's life was in a mega rut, and her head was firmly planted in the sand. Sarah's eyes closed. The environmental whispers amplified. She took a deep breath, her eyes opened upon hearing a chirp from her phone. "Happy spooks, brat. Don't be too boring tonight." The text read from a contact named Bro Denny. She replied, "Fuck you buck teeth LMAO." Sarah's ears picked up on relentless crunching. Her eyes darted right, a man approached. Silver headphones with minuscule wear and tear rested on his head. Plastic full-rimmed square glasses covered his blue eyes. He was casually good-looking. Textured navy zip-up cardigan, slim-fit black chino trousers, and a very peculiar pair of boots. They were obnoxiously orange, having a similar texture to that of pumpkin skin. A visual not so easy on the eye, however, Sarah couldn't look away. She had never seen such an unusual pair of boots. She almost respected the ballsiness to even wear them out in public. The man entered the shelter, sitting down on the bench. There was a reasonable gap between he and Sarah. She could mildly hear the song that played in his headphones. It rung a bell for her, but she couldn't quite remember what it was. The man turned to Sarah. She quickly looked away. She felt slightly uncomfortable knowing that he was now looking at her. The man then focused straight ahead, sliding the headphones down his neck. He began running his fingers thoroughly through his dark brown, Ivy League hair. "Late again, huh?" he said out loud. Sarah acknowledged his comment, turning. "Oh, never mind us, freezing our arses off." Sarah laughed. "Well, to be fair, it's not that cold, but still," he continued. Sarah half smiled while nodding her head. "Nick," he said, going for a handshake. "Sarah," she replied, awkwardly reciprocating. "So, have you been waiting long then, Sarah?" "Long enough." "I assume you're on your way home from work?" "You assumed right, Nick. I work the night shifts myself. I suppose there are worse jobs than wandering around a mostly empty warehouse." "Sounds fun," Sarah said. It has its perks, laughed Nick. What do you do, Sarah? Just as she was about to answer, they were both distracted by two men wearing matching demonic skull masks, driving motorbikes. Yeah. It's Halloween YA cunts, yelled out one of the riders. The motorbikes then sped down the road. The men screamed at the top of their lungs as they both did wheelies. Don't you just hate vermin like that, said Nick. Vermin is a bit strong, but, yeah. Sarah responded. Grown arse men, acting like snotty teens. It's fucking embarrassing. Pathetic. Sarah couldn't have agreed more. Nick appeared somewhat flustered. I've been dealing with people like that my whole life. They sicken me, fucking sicken me. You shouldn't let them get to you, you know, Sarah said. I know, but they just frustrate me so much. Like, who do they think they are? Nick sighed. A few seconds of silence then passed. Anyway, he said, motioning his hands. Like I was saying, where do you work, Sarah? At the petrol station just up there, she pointed. I know the place, it's seen better days. Do you actually like working there? It pays the bills, so, I get ya, Nick said. I'm just gonna say this, and you can tell me to fuck right off if you want to, but I think you're too bloody pretty to be working at some petrol station. Sarah's eyes fluttered, her cheeks flushed. Oh, shut up. No, I'm serious, I mean, you're a sort, Sarah. Sarah shook her head, laughing. It's true. Nick laughed back. In that moment, both made heavy eye contact. Sarah couldn't help but be captivated by this mysterious man wearing the ugliest pair of boots she had ever seen. You're quite the charmer, Nick. Well, when you've practiced as much as I have in the mirror, I mean, well, you become quite the pro. Why, thank you, Sarah. I do appreciate it. Both continued to laugh at what now had become a ridiculous conversation. Then, familiar sounds returned. Faint screaming emerged from the distance. The masked men were approaching. Here we fucking go, mumbled Nick. Oi. Danny. The fuckers are still here, the secondary rider said. The front motorbike reduced its speed, eventually coming to a full stop. The other did the same. The front rider wearing the black and yellow leather jacket removed his mask. His buddy in the brown body warmer opted to keep his on. You still waiting for your bus? Fucking hilarious. Maze, this is too sad, laughed the man in the brown body warmer. Fuck it, let's get to know the cunts, Danny boy, said Maze. Nick stared daggers. What the fuck are you looking at, Specky Four Eyes? Nick didn't budge. Maze unzipped his jacket and threw it at his motorbike. I said, what the fuck are you looking at, he said, shoving Nick's forehead. He then ripped the headphones from Nick's neck. He dropped them and proceeded to stomp rapidly. You like that, huh? You like that fuckface, laughed Maze. I hope they weren't a fortune, mate. Danny approached Sarah. Well, aren't you a little fox, he said, licking his cracked lips. Fuck off, said Sarah. Danny grabbed her by the forearm, smirking as he did so. Mouthy, he said. I'm gonna have to teach you a lesson now, slutbag. Maze watched on laughing. Go on, Danny. Show her who's king. Maze looked back at Nick. He immediately felt something sharp slice against his face. He instinctively backed away, groping his left cheek. His hand was covered in blood. Nick held a black-coated pocket knife. Beyond the lenses, his eyes displayed a look of harmful intent. Mace chose to keep up the tough guy act. Come on then, Specky, he roared. Danny rushed toward Nick. He got a knife in the stomach for his troubles. Nick yanked the knife out of the gut. The cunt stabbed me, Maze. He fucking stabbed me. Danny cried as he dropped to his knees. Sarah looked on, big-eyed. Maze moved forward with no common-sense thought. Nick pointed the knife at the oncoming. It pierced right into Maze's chubby Adam's apple. Both hands clutched his neck. He stumbled backward and collapsed onto the leaves. Nick sauntered toward him. He stood over Maze. Blood poured out between his fingers. His eyes were draining of life, and fast. Nick began penetrating the flesh of Maze. No part of him was safe. Sarah winced with each stab. She looked away, but her ears continued to absorb every sound of flesh being violated. Nick stopped upon realizing stillness had overcome Maze. He turned his attention to Danny. "Please," he screamed, guarding his wounded gut. "I fucking beg of you. Leave me alone. Please." Nick removed Danny's mask. He grabbed him by his shaggy, dirty blonde hair and positioned him to face Sarah. "I dare you. Dare you to call her slutbag again. I fucking dare you." "I'm sorry. I'm fucking sorry." "Didn't quite catch that, Danny. Say it louder. Go on. Say it. Say it." "I said I'm sorry. Please." Tears flowed from Sarah, she was frozen. "You people make me sick," Nick whispered in Danny's ear. He released his grip. Danny fell face first at Sarah's feet. "I'm sorry. Please, help," Danny muttered. Sarah let out a deafening scream as the knife plunged into his back. Nick's face was beaming. Sarah's body shivered at the sounds of Danny's cries. His vocal performance getting weaker and weaker. "Now who's the cunt? Huh? Huh? Tell me, who's the fucking cunt, Danny boy?" screamed Nick. The knife entered Danny's back again, and again, and again. Mercy didn't linger anywhere near here. Nick grabbed him by the hair and propped him up to face Sarah once more. The blade found its way in front of Danny's throat. It pressed itself against the skin. His eyes vibrated weakly. "Please, please," said Danny in a barely passable voice, then, "slice." Danny gasped, he shook, but then he collapsed once again at Sarah's feet. Nick turned his head. His eyes closed. Silence hovered over this massacre. "Why can't they leave me alone?" Nick whimpered as he put the bloodied knife back inside the inner pocket of his cardigan. "All I want is peace. It's all I've ever wanted." Nick stared back at Sarah, teary-eyed. "When will it ever end? When? I'm fucking tired." Nick wiped the tame tears away. He glanced downward. He dipped both palms into a mini blood pool. Nick entered the bus shelter and approached the frontal glass. He leisurely smeared its appearance with redness. Nick stood back, gripping both sides of his neck, and chuckled. "I just have to laugh at it all. Do you know what I mean? Like, what else can I do?" Sarah's bottom lip quivered. "Are you okay, Sarah?" Sarah couldn't look him in the eye. Her vision was firmly locked on his hideous boots. "I understand, I really do," Nick said. "People like you and me were just meant to suffer. It's not fucking fair. Nothing about it is fair, but that's just the way it is, I suppose." He tittered. "That's just the way it is." Story, short horror story. My body is deep in a state of rest. I could not move or hear my thoughts at all because in this state I am frozen. My body is getting all the energy recharge in the world. I don't know how many hours it has been since I go into the state of silence. I know that I rest my body around nighttime, but I don't remember the time that I fall to sleep. It was probably 6 p.m., 7 p.m., or even 8 p.m. Those are the usual time that any person would choose to rest. As my eyes are closed, I can only experience the darkness around me. Honesty, I feel nothing. It is like my body is skipping time and space as I rest. Maybe sleeping is a type of time travel or any other form of manipulating space. In sleep, a person skips time by hours or even days. Sleeping is just a state of rest, but can it be used for experiments for time travel? It is unlikely because it is just a state of being frozen. As my body freezes into the darkness of time, I feel a hand touching me. I could not move or think about what could touch me. I ignore it because probably a bug. However, if my body was resting, how could I feel something touching me? Am I asleep or somehow awake, but I don't know. My eyes are still in the darkness of space and time, and my body is not seen, but still present. I try to find out what just touched me. I try to wake myself up, but my body is frozen. I couldn't move an inch at all. My eyes open. The eyes see the darkness of the room and anything around it. I think that I am awake, but still, my body is frozen in time. I couldn't move my eyes or limbs at all. I try to move, but a force is holding my body together. An invisible force that has control of time, space, and even reality. A silent entity that lurks in the darkness of the place around time and space. My heart starts to beat heavily. My body breathes a sigh of fear. I feel the touching again, but this time it is claws. It scratches my legs. I couldn't feel it, but I know that whatever is touching my legs are pulling vines from it. Luckily, I couldn't feel the pain, but it still causes my heart to beat heavily. My left and right legs show the red-soaked veins, which are cut from them. I try to look up, but my head freezes in a state of fear. My eyes look around and a figure appears. The figure stands by my head. The figure has claw-like hands. One side of its face has sharp teeth like a bear. Red liquid is on its teeth. The figure has spiders crawling out of its right arm. Its right hand has sharp teeth and red eyes. The figure looks like a girl. She looks like that she is in her late teen. The figure's body has a mouth with claws on it. Spiders, beetles, scarabs, and snakes are clawing out of her mouth. On the left side, its body looks normal. The figure has blue glowing eyes. On the left hand, it has a scare mark, which is from self-mutation. I have the look of horror on my face. The girl walks up to my arms. She pulls out her left hand and tells me to be quiet. I could not move anyway. Her claws cut into my arms. She forcibly pulls out the veins in my arms. I start to cry with the feeling of invisible pain. The girl looks at me with a smile on her face. Bugs and snakes crawl all over her eyes. She pulls out a blue and gold mask. One side of the mask is gold, while the other is blue. She puts it on my face. I try to stop her from doing it, but I could not move my body. I watch as the girl put the mask on me. I could not see what was going on. I hear the girl undressing my nightgown. I hear the cold air hits my naked body. I hear laughter around me. It sounds like a child. The sounds are all around me. I could not take it anymore. I try to force myself to wake up. I try to escape this horrible nightmare that I am experiencing. I scream with anger in my voice, "Get the fuck out of my head, you bastard," I say, but my mouth didn't move. The demand goes into my mind, instead into the monster. Every time I try to fight it, an invisible force holds me. The silent force has me under its control. I keep hearing the laughter around me. I close my eyes to put an end to the nightmare. As I did close my eyes, the world around me turns into a dark place. All the darkness is around me disappears. I begin to go back to sleep. After minutes go by, I finally open my eyes. The laughter stops and at the same time, the mask is gone. I look around and my limbs are not cut. I boost up from my bed. I stand up with a look of fear on my face. I survived whatever happened to me. I feel the sweat coming from my face. I begin to cry. What was that? Sleep paralysis? A living nightmare? What the fuck, dude? I have thought that I could have died. I am glad that I didn't die. I look up at my door. As I walk up to the door, I feel something wrong. My body starts to play the beating of my heart. I start to breathe heavily. Sweat pours down my face. I feel something is behind the door. A benevolent force is behind the door waiting for me. It could have been my mind playing a trick on me. I slowly open the door. Every cracking sound the door makes I look behind and forward. My heart is racing as I open the door. When I fully open the door, I see nothing but a dark black hallway. I look with relief as I open the door. I am happy that nothing was behind the door. I walk into the hallway to the stairs and hear something behind me. Don't go outside, the voice sounds like my sister, Edlita. In her voice, she sounds worry and concern. I turn around and see her. She has a scared look on her face. Her clothes are dirty. She smells like trash. She has not taken a bath in several weeks. On her body are bumps and infectious cuts. They have not been treated in weeks. The bumps are on her arms and face. Red boils are covering her arms and the cuts on her legs. The cuts are healed due to weeks, but they are long and deep. They are still visible to see. It seems like a knife did that to her. I look at Edlita with confusion on my face. How did Edlita get all of these bumps, cuts, and boils on her skin? Why haven't Edlita got cleansed yet? I believe my mother or father would have cleansed her or noticed the infectious things on her body. I look at her and said, "Where is mommy and daddy or big sisters?" I ask with seriousness on my face. Edlita looks at me with nervousness. She starts to shake when she hears that question. She tries to avoid answering me. I look at her and repeat the question. When I repeat the question, she sits on the hallway floor. She tries to avoid it again. I don't know why she is avoiding the question, but I could sense in her heart something is wrong. All around me that area seems off. I just woke up from a dream where a monster was using me to this questionable setting. The house seems to have this feeling of weirdness. It might be my mind playing a trick on me, but how is Edlita's unclean? She wouldn't be unclean because I know my parents. They would never let Edlita be dirty or smell like trash. I know my parents, where are they? Maybe this is why Edlita is avoiding my question. Something might have happened to my parents. Edlita, please tell me what is going on. I have to know because I need to know what happens to our parents, I say with concern on my face. Edlita seems to freeze as I ask her that question. Her eyes look at me. She points at the door on the left side. It is my parents' room. By it, there is a door to my brother, Alex's room. The reason Bella does not have a room because she moved out a long time ago. I walk toward my parents' door. I stand in front of it. I knock on the door. There is no answer. I knock repeatedly. Every time I knock, there was no one waking up. They are probably in a deep sleep, I think. I look at the clock on the wall. The time says 2 p.m. It seems odd for my parents to be sleeping, as they have never slept at an early time. They would go to sleep at 9 p.m., it could be due to oversleeping, but even that it seems unlikely of them. They wake up at 5 a.m. to get Edlita ready for school. She has to be at school around 7 a.m. I knock one more time. When I did, nothing happens. I decide to do what no kid would ever do, go in their parents' bedroom without knocking. I never did that because they might be having sex or they do not want to be bother. I have to break this unwritten social rule to find the underlying cause of this unusual event. I twist the knob and open the door. As I open the door, it hits me. A force of an unpleasant smell attacks me. The smell is of rotten eggs and shit mixed together. Their room smells like the underground sewer system of Morgantown. I gag and choke on the smell. I throw up on the floor as the smell hits me. I cough the puke in my throat. I try to breathe for oxygen in my lungs. I look in the room for a quick peek. I see my parents. What I see makes me want to die and throw up again. My parents lay on the bed. Their faces show the expression of terror and horror. Their lifeless bodies are frozen in the pain of torture and suffering. It looks like a person may have enjoyed watching their pain and misery. Flies and maggots cover their bodies. They are eating the inside of their flesh. Maggots cover the eyes of my parents, eating and tearing away from their eye sockets. The flies are doing their jobs, which are producing more maggots for them to survive. I couldn't believe what I am seeing. The flies and maggots are surviving, but my parents are gone. I jump back with my heart beating. I enter my brother's room. I walk in and smell the horrific hellish scent. I look at my brother, Alex. He didn't suffer the same fate as my parents. His eyes are closed and his mouth has no expression. I didn't see that has happened to him, but I did see a pill bottle. I walk into the room. I fight off the scent to try to investigate the pill bottle. I hold my nose to breath. As I am walking into the room, I feel my eyes tearing up. Water comes down as I walk. The reaction of the smell is causing the moisture in my eyes to dry out. They feel like bricks in my eye sockets. I grab the pill bottle. I run out of the room. I yell in pain as my eyes are burning. The stone brick feeling causes my eyes to ignite in pain. I try to blink to get moisture, but it was hard. My eyelids could not automatically blink. My body is urging me to not blink because it will hurt. I hold on to the stair railings. I force my eyelids to close. As they close, the pain registers in my body. It feels like my brain explodes. My head rings like an atomic bomb explosion. I yell in pain and suffering. My eyes start to get moisture. My eyes are back to normal. My head still feels like a war site. I look at the pill bottle. The label reads cyanide. It makes sense. It could be the only pill to be able to kill a person quickly. My parents must have put the pill into Alex's mouth during sleep. Then, they must have killed themselves. It must have been murder-suicide. That does not make sense. Why would my parents murder my brother? They are not murderers. They love us. They would never do that. Why is Edlilda still alive? Why did my parents not sneak into my room and kill me? Did my sister survive the killing, or did she murder all of them? My sister would never murder her loved ones. I look at the bodies. I notice something. What I learned from a mystery movie, there has to be a killer. By the look of my parents' faces, they could not be the killers. Someone killed them. My brother, Alex, must have been killed first. The reason I believe he was killed first is due to the layout of the rooms. His room was the first door at the top of the stairs. In addition, if the killer or killers killed my parents first, he or she would alert one of my parents, thus making the killing loud, not quiet. I look at my sister and say, "Who did this? Do you remember?" As I say that, she points toward the radio and looks at it. I look at it, and I see the power button and turn it on. When I turn it on, I hear a woman voice. She is a reporter of some local news anchor. I also hear helicopters flying and gunfire. The reporter says on the radio, "Today's news, it has been 2 weeks since a prisoner by the name of Fred Bella escaped from prison and unleashed a deadly chemical on the city. It caused people around it to die. We don't know how to stop it, but Frebella had." Before the reporter can finish, I hear a sound of growling. Within seconds, I hear the reporter yells in the radio and it cuts off the connection. The radio went silent. I have a look of fear on my face. My grandmother did all of this. She caused all of this death and destruction. I knew it was a deadly chemical. I know it is possible to create a gas to kill millions. The Nazis did it to people whom they believed were inferior. How could one person manage to create a gas to kill off many people, especially since the person was in prison? I grab Edlida and carry her on my back. I walk downstairs and got in front of the door. I try to open the door, but Edlida stops me. She points toward a newspaper on the coffee table. I walk toward the coffee table and pick it up. When I pick it up, it's read "Deadly Biochemicals Causing Humans to Kill, Free for All." The description of the paper is about how Fred Bella unleashes a deadly chemical, which causes people to become mind control and kill each other. Morgantown and Evanston were not the only towns affected by the deadly chemicals. The world is affected by the deadly chemical. The death toll was 800 million people and still counting. I drop the paper in fear. I look at Adilda with sadness on my face. I feel my heart breaking as I realize that my grandmother has completed her goal. She did more kills than Hitler, Stalin, and Zedong. How did she make the chemical weapon in prison? It could not be a reality. It is no possible way that she could have done this, especially in a couple of months. I have tears coming down my eyes. I did not want to cry. I wipe the tears from my eyes and open the door. My sadness turns into a complete loss for words. I look into the red skies and the burning hollow houses. I see death and destruction around me. I see the despair and misery of the deadly chemical on its victims. Their faces meet my worry eyes. Their empty and horrendous faces lay on the road of death with the others. This did not scare me because what I saw is beyond human understanding. People walking around the bodies, but their eyes are not alive. The smell of sulfur and fire cover the walking mindless people. They let out an animalistic growl. Their eyes are dark. They walk slow and long down the street. Reanimated corpses, I know it could be possible. I try to reanimate animals to create a mindless army with my chemical, but my grandmother managed to do that. The deadly chemical, was it mine? The experiment that I performed on dying animals, did my grandmother take my experimental ideas? It can't be possible because my grandmother was in prison. No, my experiment could not have caused all of this. My experiment was supposed to be used on guilty people, not innocents. My mother destroyed it. How could my grandmother copy my plan? The corpses look at my sister and me. They start to growl. Their hunger for flesh overcomes their slow walking, and they bolt at me. 12 corpses run toward me. They are yelling hey, hey, and hey. Me and my sister look as the walking dead bolted us. Story: The Blaze, a short horror story. The seas did speak to Walter. Yet, he didn't wish to listen to their ominous tune. An ice-cold fear of those salty waves crept up his spine, as the fog did creep across the shore. That invisible frost lent the old man some ease. It's merely the cold, he whispered, shivering, nothing more. He glanced at the brick of the lighthouse and quickly got back to work. Yet, even as he reassured himself, he made nary a glance at those heavy waves. A deep gray settled over his abode, a thick blanket of lethargy that snaked up the ivory tower of the foreboding lighthouse. Accursed thing, the keeper muttered, his voice snatched away by the waves as if starved. He spoke no louder, as if afraid to be heard by the very ocean itself. Thus, he toiled away in the midday fog, careful not to peek at those icy waves as they crashed, the heavy crests leaving foam scattered on that dreary shore. A rotten stench rose on the newfound breeze. The old man's lips trembled as he looked upon the overcast sky. A storm fast approached from the east, with it the dreaded night. A worrisome amount of gulls flew overhead, their cries of delight disconcerting as they dove into the dark depths. Something caught Walter's watchful eye as he scanned the foam cautiously. A large piece of wood emblazoned with dark lettering. His face wrought with fear, Walter rushed inside. Hours passed as he sat in silence, shivering despite a smoldering fire in front of him. He poked at it restlessly as his teeth chattered. Every creak that shattered the silence earned a quick survey of the small room he was sequestered in. A suffocating anxiety plagued Walter, made much worse by the sudden crack of lightning. He flinched and his lips turned up into a grimace as the rain began pattering on his feeble house. That awful feeling persisted, and hung in the air as the last needles of sunlight were swallowed by the gray of the clouds and sea. With a shaky breath he drummed his fingers on his wooden chair, mulling over his yet-to-be-had arduous journey. Chest rising and falling rapidly, he muttered 47 steps. The second and 37th squeak. Mustn't make a sound. He repeated his nightly mantra until the words were seared upon memory. The fear somewhat abetted by the cauterization of that chant, he stood, eyes hardened and knuckles whitening. With a gaunt face, he snatched a coat and made his way out the door. Quick steps were drowned out by the immense downpour. Scurrying towards that formidable structure, he pulled the cloak tighter to shield himself from the chill. A flash of lightning illuminated the waves as Walter made haste. Barely containing a cry of fear, he sprinted as fast as his knobbly knees could carry him. Throwing open a slippery old door, he bolted inside as if the eyes of the sea were focused on the pathetic man. His heating pants broke the quiet of the room as his eyes darted around, wildly scanning the dark. Not nearly satisfied that he was alone, but with little time to waste, he began his careful, tedious ascent. 47 steps. The second and 37th squeak. Complete and utter darkness wrapped around him as he tentatively touched his gnarled old boot on the first step. 1, he said so inaudibly it perhaps didn't actually make a sound, but it thundered through Walter's mind, a roaring crackle. He reached his foot over the second and touched the third. 3. This continued for some time until the last blessed step came. Despite the chill in the air, the grizzled old man was covered in a sheen of salty moisture. He was unsure if it was sweat or tears. At last he stood before a simple wooden door. Yet, the man's terror had his heart in a firm embrace. He knew what agony awaited. Eyes glazed with fear, pupils dilated so that the earthy brown was swallowed whole by inky blackness. Walter slowly raised a shaky hand, pushing open the door. Pale tapestries of moonlight danced around him, reflecting off the glass of the lighthouse. An eerie silence descended, prevailing over the relentless storm. Fumbling in his trousers, he pulled a matchbook free. Hands quivering, he held them with a terrible fear. As if striking them were an evil deed. Holding one aloft, he brought it down with a whimper. A sharp hiss followed as a ghostly orange light barely held down the pressure of the dark. "Please," he said with trembling lips, his voice barely penetrating the quiet. He threw the match in the oil. It twirled in the air, small circles of light glinting over every surface. Not a moment later the match's flame touched the oil. A great fire erupted as he leapt towards the floor, glancing towards that obsidian tide, revealed only by that hellfire. Hundreds of ghastly faces stared back from beneath the waves, welcoming him to their cold embrace. They seemed to dance in the tide, unaffected by their shredded bodies. "And oh," he shrieked in fright, trembling as the corpses called. "Please. Forgive me," he wailed as he doused the fire and curled up on the floor, whimpering pitifully. He lay there shaking and sobbing in shame. The storm could not drown out the brutal screams and crashes as the starving sea pulled more unlucky to their domain. Story: The Forgotten Shadows. Open with eerie, unsettling music and a dark, gloomy background of an old, abandoned house. Introduce the protagonist, Emily, a curious urban explorer with a passion for uncovering hidden histories. Emily hears rumors about the old Rayburn house on the outskirts of town. The locals say it's haunted, but Emily doesn't believe in ghosts. She decides to explore the house, hoping to find some interesting artifacts or hidden stories. Emily approaches the house at dusk, capturing the decaying exterior with her camera. As she steps inside, the door creaks loudly, and a chill runs down her spine. The air is thick with dust, and the floorboards groan under her weight. While exploring the main hall, Emily finds an old, dusty photo album. She flips through the pages, seeing pictures of a happy family. Suddenly, she hears footsteps behind her. She turns around, but no one is there. Her heartbeat quickens, but she dismisses it as her imagination. Emily ventures deeper into the house. She hears whispers echoing through the halls and sees shadows moving in her peripheral vision. She tries to rationalize these occurrences, but feels an increasing sense of dread. She finds a door leading to the basement. Despite her fear, curiosity drives her to descend the creaky stairs. The basement is dark and damp, filled with old furniture and broken toys. She feels a cold breath on her neck and turns around to see a ghostly figure of a little girl staring at her. The ghostly girl points to an old trunk in the corner. Emily opens it to find newspaper clippings about the Rayburn family. They reveal a tragic story of a fire that killed the entire family, except for the little girl who went missing and was never found. Emily realizes that the ghost is the missing girl, seeking closure. Emily tries to leave the basement, but the door slams shut. The whispers grow louder, and the shadows close in on her. She understands that the spirits of the house are not malevolent, they are trapped, reliving their tragic fate. She promises to help them find peace. With the ghostly girl's help, Emily finds a hidden diary in the trunk. The diary details the family's final moments and the girl's escape plan that failed. Emily takes the diary and manages to open the basement door. As she exits the house, the spirits seem to fade, finally at peace. Emily leaves the Rayburn house, vowing to tell the world their story. She publishes her findings, and the house becomes a memorial for the Rayburn family. The video ends with Emily looking back at the house, now at peace, and a message about the importance of remembering and honoring the past. Story: The Void in Purity. I sat in the waiting room, bored out of my mind. The magazine I was reading had lost my interest. "Emily Thompson, you're up," the doctor said, stepping into the waiting room. A lady stood up and followed the doctor to another room. When I entered the hospital, she was the only other person in the waiting room, so I knew I was next up. I looked up at the TV, still on the news. Since I had arrived, it was just boring celebrity news, nothing important. But now it was showing interesting things. Serial killer caught in France, found guilty of 8 acts of murder. It showed his mugshot, with a dark shade of gray next to it. "That's his blood purity?" said the man sitting next to me. "Jesus, that's really dark. That's what killing 8 people does to you," I said. It felt like me and the man were about to start a long conversation, but before it could get any further, "Jake Anderson," the doctor said, peeking into the waiting room. I stood up and walked with the doctor. After only a few minutes, the blood donation was ready to begin. I looked over at the bag filling with my blood, and the doctor seemed impressed. "Your blood is very pure," he said. "You must be a very good person." "Well, thank you," I said, "but isn't this a normal purity?" The doctor looked at the bag again. The blood was almost completely white, with only a tiny bit of darkness. "Every single sin you commit makes your blood a little less pure," he said. "It's incredibly impressive to have blood this pure in your 30s. After only a few more minutes, I left the hospital. I checked my phone to see a message from my wife. "Tell me when you're on your way back, so I know when to start on dinner," she said. Of course, I responded, telling her I was going home now. I reminisced about our first date. I still vividly remembered her dark hair and crimson-red dress. Soon later, I arrived home. As I walked through the door, I was hit by a delicious smell. But it was also very noisy. My 2 kids were running around and causing chaos. My wife was trying to juggle between cooking dinner and trying to make the kids behave. I walked into the kitchen while she was cooking. She was so focused that she didn't even notice me. I snuck behind her and wrapped my arms around her. "Olivia," I said, with a flirtatious voice. "Jake," she responded with a sigh of relief. "How did the donation go?" she said. "It went well," I responded vaguely. The look in Olivia's eyes told me I had to say more. The doctor was really impressed by my blood purity. "That's wonderful," she said. "You know, I still haven't seen your blood purity," I said with a curious tone. Yeah, I know," Olivia said with a slightly annoyed tone. "I was a huge bully back in high school, so I'm a little ashamed of my blood purity." Olivia got back to cutting vegetables. I decided to drop the subject, knowing it was really sensitive for her. But before I could say any more, there was a loud crash sound. I looked over to see my children had knocked over an expensive vase, and it shattered. But as I turned towards the commotion, I suddenly heard another loud sound, a high-pitched cry. The sudden commotion startled Olivia, and the tip of her middle finger had slipped right where the knife was cutting. I quickly grabbed a towel to help, but I saw a horrible sight, one that made me jump back in fear. Olivia's blood was pitch black, having absolutely no reflection, no glimpse of light, just pure darkness. Anything it touched looked like it disappeared. I stood there, staring in shock. The killer in France who had murdered 8 people didn't even have blood that dark. What the fuck did she do? I felt like I was in some sort of hypnosis, but I was suddenly snapped out of it with a sudden flash of light. A bit of blood had fallen off of the knife, revealing its shiny silver. I suddenly grabbed my kids and ran to the car. I didn't have time to explain the situation before running off. As I drove away, I could hear screams of despair and anguish coming from the house, from Olivia. My kids screamed in fear, not knowing what was going on. Did they even see Olivia's blood? No, I don't think they had any idea. After what felt like an eternity of driving, I stopped. I broke down crying. What should I do? I can't go back there with that sociopath. But can I really abandon everything I had? What will I tell my kids? My parents? What about the police? She has clearly done something horrible and unforgivable, but I don't know what. Shit, 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 shit. I'm muttering to myself. What do I do? What can I do? Am I truly helpless? Story, Tongues, a horror story. It was already 2 years ago. I still remember that ghastly night. I was arriving home in my car. I went to park it and I saw a person sitting on the bench of my parents' house front yard. I went there and talked to him. Asked who he was. He just contemplated me with the most horrifying stare for what felt like a solid minute. I was in shock. I saw he had a hand in his pocket and his menacingly gaze made me realize I could get hurt if I stayed there. I went home, got to my room and looked at him through the blinds in my window. He wouldn't move. I was thinking of calling the police, but I didn't want to wake up my parents. I became paranoid at this point and couldn't go to sleep, had the need to be looking through the blinds at this mysterious character. It was already 3 a.m. and the man didn't move an inch. I just noticed that he moved once to smoke a cigarette. I was getting very tired and eventually blacked out. I woke up to a loud slam, like one of the doors was closed violently. I immediately got up and went to my window. To my surprise, the man wasn't there anymore. This made me freak out. I grabbed my flashlight and went searching room by room, from my bedroom to the living room, next the bathroom, the kitchen, the basement. When I got to the basement, after I went down the stairs, the door behind me was slammed shut. I got startled and ran up the stairs, tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. I banged at the door in the expectation of my parents listening and coming down from their room to help me get out of the basement. This was to no avail. I sat on the floor and waited for someone to help me get out of there. 4 a.m., I woke up, had blacked out once again. Went to the door again to bang it to make someone come help me. I tried to turn the knob and miraculously the door opened. I was so relieved, I wondered how and why the door got locked in the first place. Went to check my parents' room to see if they were okay since they didn't hear my loud banging. I entered their room when I saw the mess that was my parents' room. I almost vomited, dropped to my knees and got paralyzed. They were both dead. In the walls was written with their blood, "Now they won't be talking anymore." I approached them and noticed their tongues were missing and their cheeks were cut ear to ear, like a big smile. I called the cops to come to my parents' house as soon as possible since there had been a dual homicide. The cops were suspecting it was me who did the act, but I assured them I was locked by an unknown cause in the basement. They made a team come get my parents' corpses. They were in shock since they had never seen someone do to their faces what this maniac did. I didn't know at the time that this man was the one responsible for locking me in the basement and then murdering both of my parents. How did I come to discover it? Well, the work the police were doing was taking a lot of time. I was feeling desperate to find the one responsible for that atrocity. I am a big fan of cosplaying, yet I don't cosplay myself. I like to see others doing it, also dressing up with original masks and costumes. There was a convention in my town, one about costumes and that kind of stuff. This year I made a mask just to get in the spirit the day of the convention. At the event, I saw many awesome masks and costumes, but one caught my eye. It was one that had a mask made of leather, had some spikes on top, and had below each eye a tongue, two very realistic tongues. I followed that guy around the convention. There was something bugging me about this fellow. When he went out of the building where the event was taking place to smoke a cigarette, he took off his mask. I got shocked. It was the same man that was sitting in the bench of my parents' house front yard. I started connecting the pieces, and it all started to make sense. Only thing that was bugging me now is that I can't accuse this man just because of this coincidence. He noticed I was looking at him and approached me. He said, "Do I know you?" I said maybe. We started chatting. Eventually he gave me his phone number before we left the event. He was a kind person. I don't see why I feared him before. Yet the idea that he might have to do with the death of my parents is still bugging me. We hang out for some days until he starts acting a bit weird. He invites me more than usual to go to his house and have dinner or lunch with him. He makes excellent food, so I don't refuse his invites. Funny thing about his food is that it tastes and smells a bit like almonds always. I kind of enjoyed it. I didn't know I was falling into a trap. One day I feel that is very hard to breathe, like I breathed in the air, but it felt like I wasn't getting any oxygen out of it. I instantly phoned emergency services and explained how I was feeling. They sent right away an ambulance to my house. When they got there, I was seizing on the floor. I went to the hospital and they administered medication to stop the seizures and make me be able to breathe again. They ran some blood tests, and as it turns out, I was secretly being poisoned. It finally made sense. I told the police that that man was slowly poisoning me. The police interrogated him, and as it turns out, both the already running investigation to find my parents' murder and now the investigation to find out who poisoned me traced all back to that man. The police also found the mask he took the event, ran some tests on the tongues of the mask, and found out that the DNA of those tongues are both from my mother and my father. He was arrested and sent to jail. I don't know how much time he's going to spend there. I just hope that if he comes out, he never hurts anyone ever again. I'm still traumatized to this day by what happened and what I saw. Story: Two Little Girls. Springfield, Ohio, August of 1992. I was an 8-year-old that particular summer. My parents only recently started letting me go outside by myself, and I was taking full advantage, but I had rules to follow, or my rights would be immediately revoked. For one, I couldn't leave my family's property. We kids had a large backyard with 2 outdoor playsets with slides and swings, so entertainment wasn't an issue, even if I had to keep it contained to the yard. Mom said it was for our own protection. She said that strangers can't be trusted, so we had to stay in the backyard, and never play in front or by the side of the road where we could easily be snatched. I didn't always obey this, but I never got caught either. This changed quickly one wet, balmy summer afternoon when my mom got word that 2 little girls about my age were missing. They had last been seen at the bakery just down the street from our house while buying sweets, their bikes discarded by the side of the road as if the girls were snatched. Or so that's what my mother told me. After a search, the girls, Free Morrow and Martha Leach, aged 11 and 12, were found dead in a gruesome, horrible fashion. I won't go into it here because the awful things they did to those girls isn't the point of this story. However, the shit I'm not talking about here is easily found online with just a quick search. Just know though, that the details are fucked up and it's not for the faint of heart. The parents of Springfield changed that day. All of my newly given freedoms were revoked. After all, the killer, or killers, were still at large. For all my mom knew, it could have been one of our neighbors. She didn't trust anyone anymore. I didn't understand it at the time, but as a parent now, I fully get it. If I were my mom, I would have locked my children down, as well. What else could she have done? There were so few options available. Who else was going to protect us if not our own parents? Everyone else was too busy trying to figure out who the murderer was.
I frankly didn't care at the time who killed them. I only cared that they were dead and not coming back. I didn't know Martha very well, but I was pretty familiar with Free. The girls were a bit older than me, and we didn't share any classes, but I knew Free most through a summer gym program we both attended a month or so earlier. My brain couldn't wrap around it. I kept hearing about the horrible details of their deaths, of the terrible state that the killers left them in, of facts I wasn't mentally prepared for, but had to hear anyway. The news left few details out in those days, and what I didn't fully understand at the beginning of a school day, I was well educated in the schoolyard by the time I got home in the afternoon. 8-year-olds have no business hearing about the cruel ways their playmates' corpses were desecrated, but there I was. I heard the funeral was a real shit show, but I obviously wasn't there for that. My mom had a thing about me and funerals. She didn't think I was ready to go to any until I was well into my teens, and even then, was overprotective in the extreme when I finally went to my first one with her.
Story: My mentally disabled brother spent 3 days in the house with my mother's dead body. He says something inhuman slunk through the house at night. I moved away from my hometown a few years ago. My father had committed suicide when I was a small boy, going out to the barn and shooting himself in the face with a shotgun. I barely remember him still. The only thing that stays with me from that day was my mother's agonized, racking sobs when she found his mutilated body. Sometimes, during nightmares late at night, I still hear those same screams, repeating over and over like a skipping record. My little brother, Charlie, was born with Down syndrome. My mother took care of Charlie by herself since I moved away. I rarely talked to my family, something I feel increasingly guilty about looking back. Unbeknownst to me, my mother had a worsening addiction to pills and alcohol. To this day, I don't know if she intended to kill herself or not. But, after examining her corpse, the medical examiner concluded that she had a lethal combination of benzos, morphine and vodka in her system. When they found her body rotting in the summer heat in her bedroom 3 days later, they said she had one eye half open, her arm still outstretched towards the telephone, as if trying to call for help even in death. The police ended up finding my number a few days later. I lived over 5 hours away, but when I heard Charlie was being kept at the police station, I immediately took the day off of work and headed back towards my hometown of Frost Hollow. I remember driving through the rural town, a place of rolling hills and thick, dark forests, thinking how dead and empty the whole area looked. A lot of the houses that had been there when I was younger had since been demolished or lay barren, dilapidated and rotting. The police station in the center of town seemed to be one of the few places still open. I looked at the shuttered windows lining both sides of Main Street, seeing one out-of-business sign after another. On the bright side, however, there were plenty of parking spots along the cracked, empty streets. I got out of the car, seeing a feral, mange-covered dog ripping through bags of garbage in a nearby alleyway. The sickly sweet smell of decaying trash filled the air, thick and cloying. I entered the glass doors of the police station, finding an old crone pecking at a keyboard behind the front desk. She looked like a twisted dwarf, her eyes magnified to giant orbs behind her glasses. She looked up at me with a pale, bloodless face. "Yes," she said in an annoyed voice. "I'm here to pick up Charlie Benton," I said. The old woman looked behind her, where a tanned woman in a police officer's uniform was leaning against a rusted metal cabinet, looking through a file. "Sergeant Alvarez deals with that," the old woman spat, looking back at her computer. The police officer sighed, looking up at me with humorless eyes. A few moments later, she circled around, coming out the tinted black glass door around the side. The slow, erratic typing of the old woman continued ringing out like the ticking of a failing heart. Sergeant Alvarez had wide, almond-shaped eyes and jet-black hair pulled back in a ponytail. She did not look happy to see me. "You're Dennis?" she asked. I nodded, pulling out my license. She inspected it closely before handing it back to me. "We found your brother in quite a state. He was covered in blood, naked from the waist up, wandering through people's backyards at night. When the police found him, at first he was unresponsive, as if he were sleepwalking or something. His eyes were open, but he was not talking and appeared to be looking at things only he could see. After about 30 seconds of this, they said he appeared to wake up, though he still wasn't giving coherent answers at first. He just kept saying, "She was walking, she was walking." Eventually, after a lot of trying, they were able to ask him about why he was wandering at night and why he was covered in injuries and blood. "Your brother said something kept hurting him in the house at night and that he had to get out." "He had marks on his body," Sergeant Alvarez said, her eyes suspicious. Intelligence gleamed behind them. "The strangest thing. It looked like someone had burned hand marks into his back and shoulders." I found this information disturbing on some instinctive, primal level, but I didn't know why. "Who could have done that?" I asked, confused. She shrugged. "Charlie couldn't tell us," she said. "Your mother had been dead for 3 days by that point, and the wounds on Charlie's body were fresh. Do you know if there was anyone else who regularly visited or lived in the house with them?" I shook my head. "My mother had no friends," I said. "She was practically a hermit. She used to just stare out the window for hours when I lived there like a zombie. No one ever came to visit her." The black doors swung open again, and Charlie stood there next to a muscular police officer. Charlie's face had his typical vacant stare. Charlie appeared in his mid-20s, a sweaty, lumpy mass of a human being wearing a tight pinky and the Brain t-shirt. His enormous belly hung over his belt, his shirt seemingly always pulled up to expose a few inches of naked flesh. He had confused, mud-brown eyes that rarely focused on anything for longer than a few seconds. But there were other times Charlie seemed to have an almost photographic memory, repeating entire conversations in his strange, droning monotone even months after they had taken place. "She is dead," he said, his muddy brown eyes unfocused. "She is dead. She was walking." I squinted at him, feeling cold dread dripping down my heart. "Charlie, buddy, it's okay now," I said, taking a step towards him. He looked up abruptly, seeming to just now realize that I was there. "Dennis," he screamed, his enormous belly jiggling as he ran forward. He wrapped his thick arms around me, his face filled with an innocent, childlike excitement. He lifted me off the ground. A breathy exhalation of fetid breath hit me directly in my face. I grunted as he squeezed the air out of my lungs. Charlie was immensely strong and often didn't realize his own strength. "You're crushing me, buddy," I grunted in a small, crushed voice. Charlie dropped me back down on the ground. I looked closer at him, seeing healing, sickly wounds peeking above the neckline of his t-shirt. A rainbow of black, purple, and blue marks hung there, formed in the shape of long, twisted fingers. The worst of them had drops of pus falling from the burnt craters in the center. I wondered how many more lay hidden beneath his clothes. Sergeant Alvarez gave me her card, telling me to call her if I found out any more information about the case or if Charlie remembered anything or was able to give more information in the future. I wondered who could have possibly been hurting Charlie. It made me feel sick and angry, thinking of someone following him around, scaring him and attacking him during the night. Charlie already hated and feared the dark as it was, adding another layer of cruelty to the disturbing case. He had feared it ever since he was a small boy. I walked him out of the police station, buckling him into the passenger seat of the car. As I sat down in the driver's seat, he looked over at me. Sweat glistened on his upper lip, and his goofy bowl cut of a haircut was sticking up in random spots. "Dennis, I saw her," Charlie said in his flat monotone. "She was walking. At night, I heard her feet. In the dark, I heard her feet." "Who was Buddy?" I asked. "Who did that to you? Did someone hurt you during the nighttime?" He nodded. A single tear fell from his squinty eyes, dripping down his round face. "It wasn't Mom?" He shook his head in response. His lips started quivering. He leaned close to me, whispering in a hoarse, terror-stricken voice. "The bone-faced woman," he hissed, breaking down in tears. I had contacted a team to remove the soiled items in the master bedroom after receiving a call from the police. The team told me it would be a fairly easy job, and that I would be able to stay in the house later that night. With no other living family except Charlie, I would undoubtedly inherit it anyway, though I had absolutely no intention of keeping it. I wanted to sell it as soon as possible, but I would have to go through everything and decide what, if anything, I wanted to keep. All of Charlie's stuff was also still in the house, which I knew we would need to go through and package regardless. It was a Friday, and I had the weekend off work. My plan was to finish moving everything out of my mother's house that weekend. Charlie and I pulled into the sprawling property that night, turning onto the flat, dirt driveway towards the old colonial. Sharp stones crunched rhythmically under the tires. I took in the sight, the large windows and wraparound porch of the dark purple house. I saw my childhood neighbor, Sloan Herbick, standing outside on his front lawn. Behind him loomed his Victorian house, a blood-red building of sharp turrets and dark, dusty windows. Sloan Herbick was a strange man in more ways than one. He had been burned horribly as an infant in a crib fire, barely surviving with his life. Melted folds of lumpy scar tissue covered most of his body, including his face and head. Miraculously, he hadn't lost his eyesight, nose, or lips, but both of his ears were missing as well as all the hair on his head except his long, black eyelashes. His horrifyingly scarred body looked nearly as pale as an albino's, but his eyes were as dark as sin. I remembered Sloan as an arrogant, aloof man with no friends, about 10 years older than myself. According to what my mother told me as a teenager, Sloan's mother had gone missing when I was little, during the time when they were constructing our then brand new home in Frost Hollow. By now, I thought, he must be at least 40, though the keloid scars and mutilated ridges of flesh running over his entire body made it impossible to tell. As I got out of the car, I gave a neighborly wave, but Sloan ignored me. He stared fervently down at the hole, slamming the sharp tip of the shovel into the earth over and over again at a frenetic pace. I walked by Charlie's side up the rickety wooden steps to the front porch, pulling the spare house key out of my pocket from so many years ago. With trembling fingers, I slid the key into the lock, finding that my keys still worked, as I knew they would. The door opened onto a dark, sinister hallway. A nauseating odor emanated from the house, blowing out the front door like the rancid breath of some primordial monster. It was the smell of rotting bodies, clotted blood, and infection. It left a slightly sweet aftertaste. Gagging, I flipped on the light switch. I took a step forward, but Charlie didn't follow. He stared up at me with an unusual intensity, taking his huge, round arms and crossing them over his chest. The front of his dirt-caked sneakers came up the perimeter of the threshold, but he refused to go any further. He just shook his greasy, sweat-covered face. "Come on, buddy," I said encouragingly, giving him a wide smile. "What's wrong?" He pointed behind me, down the hallway. I instantly looked over my shoulder, my heart leaping up like a jackrabbit. Having watched far too many horror movies, I expected to see some Blood Street tag standing there with a face like a skull and an ear-to-ear grin. But the hallway lay empty. "She's still here," Charlie said slowly, his eyes giant, glassy orbs of terror. "She is dead." "Mom's not here, buddy," I answered, ambling back toward him and taking one of his enormous hands in mine. I could feel the width of it, the smooth flatness of his palms except for one thick ridge. "Mom's at the funeral home. We're going to see her Sunday, remember?" Charlie shook his head again, his hair flying everywhere. "This place is bad," he said. "We've got to stay here for the weekend, Charlie," I responded, feeling a rising sense of irritation. "I already explained it all to you. The house is fine. They took the dead body out already, so what's the problem? You'll be with me the whole time." "It will be bad," Charlie said, sweating heavily. "It won't be scary, buddy. I promise." Looking back, it is hard to imagine any more untrue words than those. Much of the stuff from my mother's room had been taken out by the cleaning team. They told me that some of her fluids had burst from her body, staining the mattress and bed frame with their black rot. Luckily, not much had gotten on the floor, but a small puddle had dripped down. The guest bedroom was directly underneath Mom's room, just a small, square room on the first floor with a bed, a dresser, and a TV. I kept the bedside lamp on all night. On the ceiling of the room, there was a Rorschach ink blot of dead, rotted fluids that still needed to be cleaned up. It was about the size of a basketball and looked like an eye. It had a dark, circular spot in the center, followed by thin, black tendrils that cracked their way towards the oval perimeter of the stain. Charlie crawled into bed next to me, putting a heavy, hot hand on my shoulder before falling asleep almost instantly. But I couldn't sleep. After what felt like an eternity, I looked over at the red lights of the alarm clock, seeing it was 3:32 a.m. I swore under my breath, sensing that my insomnia would not leave me alone this weekend in this place of horrors. At exactly 3:33, a jarring mechanical shrieking started outside. I jumped up in bed. Charlie awoke instantly. He sat up so fast that he smacked his head on the wall with a dull bank. "What the fuck is that noise?" I hissed, jumping out of bed. I looked up at the stain as I went, giving it a distrustful glance backwards. The mechanical caterwauling seemed to be growing louder as I made my way toward the front of the house. I went to the front window, seeing Sloan Herbeck running a wood chipper next to his totally dark house. I could just barely make out his dull silhouette, hearing the din of the constant grinding. Charlie gave an incomprehensible scream in the guest bedroom. I heard his heavy footsteps running toward me. His face was red and flushed, his pupils dilated and frantic. "The eye moved," he said, his voice having more emotion than I had heard in it in a long time. I blinked, the fog of sleep still clouding my mind. "You mean the stain?" I asked, finally figuring out what he was talking about. "The stain on the ceiling?" He nodded ferociously, bobbing his head up and down quickly. Eventually, I ended up talking Charlie down and getting him back to bed. The stain was still in the same spot, as far as I could tell. Around 4 a.m., the sound of the wood chipper finally died. In the eerie silence of the dark house, I fell into a nightmarish fever dream where I saw women bound with chains in a basement surrounding a mannequin wearing a suit made of human skin. The next morning, I went over to Sloane's house and knocked until he answered. While I waited, I studied the strange gargoyle knocker plastered across the scarlet door. At first, he would only crack it open a fraction of an inch, staring out at me with a single black eye. "Can you not run the wood chipper in the middle of the night?" I asked, giving him a faint, anxious half-smile. "It's keeping me and Charlie from sleeping." "I mean, you had the thing going at 3 a.m. last night." A few heartbeats later, the front door flew open. Sloane took a step towards me, until his scarred, alien face stood only inches from mine. "It's because of my skin, isn't it?" he asked in a hoarse, low voice. He spoke in a strange cadence, mumbling the words in dissonant rhythms. "If someone cut your eyes out so you couldn't see how ugly I am, you wouldn't care about the wood chipper anymore, would you?" I took a step back, the smile peeling off my face. I reached for the canister of police mace in my pocket, gripping it firmly and putting my hand on the trigger. "Sloane, that has nothing to do with that," I answered coldly, narrowing my eyes at him. "Don't act like a goddamn psycho. Look, if you keep that shit up, I'll call the cops. Don't fucking do it again." I had no patience for nut jobs like him. He always gave me the creeps. As a kid, someone had gone around pouring bleach into the eyes of people's cats and dogs, blinding them and leading to some getting euthanized. I always suspected Sloane of doing it, though he never got caught. My brother and I spent the rest of that day packing up anything we wanted to take with us, putting it in boxes and labeling it. Charlie didn't have a lot of possessions, and Mom didn't exactly have a lot of valuable items in her house, so it was fairly quick going. I figured I would either end up selling or donating most of the crap left behind in the end. Before I knew it, the sun had started setting again. The darkness of a moonless sky descended on Frost Hollow like a guillotine blade. My brother and I kept working, mostly in silence, though Charlie would come over and show me random objects he had recently acquired. "Rick," Charlie said, proudly holding up a plush doll of Rick from Rick and Morty. A trickle of fake drool dripped Rick's mouth, and a trickle of real one from Charlie's. I laughed, ruffling his hair as if he were a toddler. "That's right. I answered excitedly, "That's Rick." "You like Rick, buddy? You like how he just does whatever he wants whenever he feels like?" Charlie nodded excitedly at that. After a couple more hours of sorting, I decided to go to bed. I wanted to leave as early as possible on Sunday morning after the funeral, which was the next day. Charlie followed me like a puppy, his normally unfocused eyes flitting from one side to the other with a kind of intensity one had rarely seen there before. He constantly scanned the shadows, as if looking for something. We kept all the lights in the surrounding rooms and the guest bedroom. As I lay there, about to fall asleep, I glanced over at Charlie and saw him staring straight up at the stain with wide, watery eyes. I don't know how long it was later when I awoke suddenly in the pitch black. I blinked quickly, confused. And then I heard it, the noise that had caused me to sit up in bed. Right over me, I heard something gurgling and hissing in rhythmic breaths. It sounded as if whatever it was had lungs filled with blood and dirt. The terror I felt at that moment was incomprehensible. But it grew much worse when two burning, skeletal hands reached down and grabbed me. They covered my right arm in an iron grip, the thin, blade-like fingers feeling inhumanly long. I could feel my skin burning and melting. I screamed, kicking out with my legs and trying to pull away. I brought my left hand up, grabbing blindly for the thing's face. I groped in the darkness until I felt it, a face like a skull. It was slick and wet under my touch, sticky with clotted blood. I felt the muscles of its skeletal face thrumming and contracting. The thing had no skin. I repressed an urge to scream, instead reaching for its eyes, even as its burning hands continued yanking at my arm, trying to pull me off the bed. I felt a nose that was just a ragged hole of destroyed flesh, felt the fetid breath passing softly through those mutilated patches. I reached up into its eyes, but there were no eyes there, just two empty sockets. I reached inside and felt the skittering of insect larvae under my fingers. At the back of the empty socket, my fingers groped thin strands like fleshy wires that had been severed. With all of my strength, I stuck my finger deep down into that warm, twisting socket, stabbing my fingernails into the optic nerves and vessels at the back and ripping. The hands on my arm instantly released. I felt some of the melted skin go with them, heard the tearing of my flesh as warm blood instantly dripped from the wounds. Hyperventilating, my breath hissing with pain, I fumbled in my pocket for my lighter. I brought it up, flicking it. I caught a glimpse of the thing my brother called the bone-face woman, her naked, skeletal body running out of the room with a sickly gurgling of her diseased lungs. Overhead, the stain had turned into a real eye, a fleshy, black thing that flitted over the arm with a dilated pupil. It emanated insanity, its stare glassy and inhuman. Charlie lay on the floor, his eyes open but unseeing. My breath caught in my throat, the burning agony in my arm temporarily forgotten. I ran toward my brother, kneeling down over his limp body and shaking him. I saw fresh burn marks in the shape of a hand on his face, covering his forehead and temples. The cracked, broken flesh dribbled pus and blood like thick, clotted tears down his cheeks. When he didn't respond, I shook him again, grabbing him by the chin and forcing his eyes to meet mine. I saw him blink. He inhaled like a drowning man, grabbing my hand tightly and shaking his head from side to side. "She was here," he whispered. "She is dead, Dennis. She lives in the dirt. We need to get out of here and never come back," I said, trying to pull Charlie up. He was far too heavy. "Can you get up, buddy? Come on, we'll leave now." With great difficulty, Charlie pulled himself up. His eyes started watering as the weeping burn marks continuously dripped a rainbow of clotted fluids. I took out my phone, trying to call for help, but nothing was working in the house anymore. The electricity had gone off, which was why the lights had all gone out, but that wouldn't explain why my fully charged cell phone had gone black as well. Charlie and I stumbled outside. I put him in the passenger's seat of the car, deciding to get the hell out of there and never come back. But when I tried to turn the starter, the car didn't make a sound. The engine didn't even make an attempt to turn over. "It's her," Charlie whispered, his face a mask of terror and pain in the darkness. The bone-face woman wants us to stay. Well, she can go fuck herself, I spat, anger and fear mixing in a toxic sludge in my blood. I watched the house closely, seeing the curtains at the front moving. I caught an occasional glimpse of that abomination peeking out at us with her empty eye sockets and skinned face. I looked at Sloane's house, realizing I could call for help from there. He was the only neighbor within a half-mile radius. Charlie, the car is not working and I need to call for help. I'm going to go across the street and use Sloane's phone to call the cops. I want you to lock yourself in the car. Don't open the door for anyone except me or the cops. You got that? I asked, keeping a constant watch on the house, expecting the bone-face woman to slink out after us at any moment. She is dead, Charlie said robotically. She is walking. She will not let us leave. After I had made sure Charlie had locked himself in the car, I sprinted over to Sloane's dark Victorian house. I ran up the porch steps, ready to start knocking frantically on the door. But as soon as I touched it, it creaked slowly open, showing a dimly lit kitchen. A single oven light was turned on. I looked around in disgust. The place was filthy. Mold-covered pots and pans covered the stovetop. Drying crusts of filth covered a mountain of dishes emerging from the sink. Maggots and other insects feasted like kings here. The white reflections of glittering rat and mouse eyes peeked out at me from the corners of the room. Sloane? I called, not wanting to be too loud. Even though I wouldn't have admitted it to him, I was, quite honestly, terrified of Sloane Herbick. There was something off about that man. I left the kitchen, moving to the living room. There was only a single night light in here. All around me loomed naked human skins nailed to the wall. They rose in 2 rows, the bottom row offset from the top by a few feet so that more of the space could be used. I crept closer with wide eyes, realizing that the vast majority were just latex or silicone. Not all of them, however. Stuck randomly among the fake hanging skins were some that looked different. These looked thicker and had soft ridges running over their surface. I even saw signs of belly buttons, tattoos and nipples on these leathery skins. At that moment, I knew without a doubt that they were human. Many looked ancient and cracked, the leather falling apart at the shoulders or waist. There was a couch covered in what looked like gore in the center of the room facing a TV and DVD player. On a small, wooden table next to it lay a phone and a blood-encrusted meat cleaver. Shaking with excitement and fear, I crept closer to them, immediately grabbing the weapon. I took Sergeant Alvarez's card from my pocket, calling it. She answered on the second ring, sounding tired. "Hello," she said. "Sergeant Alvarez speaking." "This is Dennis Benton," I whispered furtively. "I need help immediately. Send an ambulance and police to my mother's house at 332 Angel Trace Road. Something's happened." "Where are you right now?" she asked. "I'm at my neighbor's across the street, but there's, like, body parts everywhere? I think he might be a serial killer. I don't know what the fuck's going on here, but please, hurry." I gently put the phone back down on the cradle, hearing a floorboard creak behind me. Sloane Herbick stood there, his dark eyes blazing. He pointed a pistol straight at my head. Looking down the barrel felt like looking into eternity. He was wearing a suit made of what looked like pale, white human skin. It covered him from head to foot, hugging his body with precision. All of the thread and sewing marks were expertly hidden. It almost made him look like some strange alien nudist, wearing a suit of white leather. At his feet, he had an open canister of gasoline. With practiced ease, he kicked it over, letting the pungent liquid spill out onto the floor all around me. "Hey man, you don't have to do this," I said, trying to act calm but quivering inside. I expected him to pull the trigger at any second, and then it would be lights out forever. "I've already started," he said, grinning and pointing out the window. I saw my house burning across the street. I felt the blood drain from my face as I thought about Charlie, sitting there in the car with his childlike innocence. I hoped he would know to get out in time. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, horrified. I never did anything to you. Everyone who looked at me did something to me, he spat. They hated me because I'm ugly and burned. But now I have a new skin, so people can't hate me anymore. I made it myself, and this face? He pointed at the dried human skin wrapping around his head. This is my mother's. She was one of my first, but she never truly left, you see. She told me, take it. This is my body, given to you. Take my skin, take my face and my hair, and from it, make yourself a new body. Make yourself a thing of beauty, as soft and pale as winter moonlight. After I killed her, I buried her under the dirt in your house, back when it was being built. I knew they would pour the foundation the next day. All those tons of concrete covered her, took her away, and then no one ever knew what happened. He shrugged. It had to be done, to make me whole again. No mother could see her own son become a twisted, ugly thing, after all. The rest of the skin mostly came from prostitutes. I find female skin is much softer, more malleable, and easier to work with. They also take better care of their skin than men. He laughed softly at this. Okay, so you've already finished your suit, I said, sweating heavily. So let me go. I have nothing to do with this. He smiled an insane rictus grin behind his leathery mask. I only need one more piece, and that is the soles of the feet, he answered in his cold, psychopathic way. I'll get those from you. Goodbye, Dennis. It was nice seeing you again. At that moment, Charlie stumbled in the room, his movements loud and ungraceful. Sloane turned, surprised. A heartbeat later, Charlie slammed his heavy body against Sloane's back, sending him flying. The pistol went off, the bullet missing me by inches. I heard it whiz over the top of my head and smash into the ceiling above me. Cold dread worked its way down my spine as I realized I had just missed death by inches. Sloane landed on his stomach at Charlie's feet. Screaming, Sloane put his left hand up, revealing a Zippo lighter there. He flicked it, throwing it at the pile of gasoline. I backpedaled quickly, trying to go around the blazing ball of fire and get to Sloane. Get the gun! I screamed at Charlie. Charlie looked down at Sloane with slow comprehension dawning in his face. He took one massive sneaker and stomped down on Sloane's right hand with the pistol in it. I heard the bone crack like twigs snapping. Sloane shrieked, trying to pull away, but Charlie continued leaning down on his arm, preventing him from moving it. The fire was creeping at an incredible rate, rising up the walls and across the ceiling. Thick, black smoke filled the room, suffocating us. I ran at Charlie, my eyes watering. I realized I was still holding the meat cleaver in one hand. I looked down at Sloane in his suit of human skin, still trying to raise the gun with his broken arm. I wanted to finish this quickly. I brought the knife down into the back of his neck, hearing the bone crack. There was a wet thud and a bubbling of blood as the meat cleaver bit deeply into through his spine, and then Sloane was still. Come on, Charlie, I said, grabbing his large hand. He wrapped his fingers around mine. Coughing and choking, we stumbled out into the night as police cars started pulling up. The first one had Sergeant Alvarez in it, who ran towards us, helping a stumbling Charlie toward the back seat of her car where he could sit down and catch his breath. Both houses were on fire now, blazing pillars of flame that rose high into the black, starless sky. At that moment, I only hoped that the flames would eat away the corpse of Sloane's mother, the bone-face woman. Bye and see you again in the next videos and stories.